If you've ever sat in your car before work and thought, I can't keep doing this video is for you. If you've ever opened your email and felt your chest tighten because your boss's name popped up on the screen, this video is for you. If you've ever walked into a meeting already preparing to be interrupted, blamed, dismissed, embarrassed, or spoken to like your effort means nothing, this video is for you. Because having a toxic boss doesn't just make your job harder. It gets inside your head. It chips away at your confidence one conversation at a time. It makes you second-guess things you were once good at. It makes you replay meetings in your mind at night. It makes you wonder whether you're the problem, whether you're too sensitive, whether maybe you really are underperforming, even when the truth is, you've simply been standing too close to someone who leads through pressure, insecurity, chaos, and control. And the worst part is this. A toxic boss doesn't just affect your work. They can quietly follow you home. They can steal your energy at dinner. They can make you short with people you love. They can make Sunday feel heavy. They can make you dread Monday before the weekend is even over. They can turn a job into a psychological endurance test. Now, a lot of people will tell you the answer is simple. Just quit, leave, walk away, find another company, protect your peace. And yes, sometimes leaving is the right move. But let's be honest, real life is not always that simple. Maybe you have bills to pay. Maybe you're supporting a family. Maybe you need the health insurance. Maybe the job market in your field is slow. Maybe you've worked too hard to build your position to throw it away overnight. Maybe you already know you want to leave eventually, but you're not in a position to do it today. So if quitting is not an immediate option, what do? Do you stay quiet and hope they change? Do you keep absorbing the disrespect and tell yourself to be patient? Do you try harder and harder to earn approval from someone who seems determined to withhold it? Do you keep shrinking yourself just to survive the week? No, because that strategy comes with a price. If you stay in a toxic environment without a strategy, you don't just lose comfort, you lose clarity, you lose self-trust. You lose emotional energy. And if you stay there long enough with no boundaries, no system, and no mental separation, something even more dangerous can happen. You begin adapting to the toxicity. You start normalizing what should never feel normal. You start speaking in the same defensive tone. You start carrying the same anxiety into every interaction. You start becoming reactive, bitter, suspicious, exhausted, not because that's who you are, but because that's what survival mode does when it goes on for too long. That's why this video is not about pretending everything is fine. And it's not about teaching you how to win over a toxic boss with charm or how to magically transform them into a healthy leader. That is not the goal. The goal is much more practical than that. The goal is to help you protect your mind, protect your confidence, and protect your future while you are still in the environment. The goal is to help you stop bleeding emotionally every time they act like themselves. The goal is to help you regain control, even if you can't change the person above you. Because here's the truth, most people learn too late. When you can't control the environment, your power comes from controlling your interpretation, your preparation, your response, and your long-term strategy. That is how you survive a toxic boss, without letting them shape who you become. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Not vague advice, not motivational cliches, not just stay positive. We're going to talk about 3 specific things you can do when you're stuck working under a toxic boss, and quitting is not yet on the table. 3 things that help you stop feeling powerless. 3 things that help you take your peace back without needing their permission. 3 things that help you turn a damaging situation into a training ground for emotional control, professional strength, and your next career move. Because even in a bad environment, you still have choices. You can choose not to internalize every insult. You can choose not to let someone else's dysfunction become your identity. You can choose to use this season as preparation instead of destruction. And if you've been dealing with a boss who drains you, belittles you, manipulates you, or makes you feel like you're slowly disappearing at work, I want you to do one thing before we go any further. Drop a comment below and tell me this. What's the hardest part of dealing with a toxic boss? The anger, the anxiety, the self-doubt, or feeling trapped because you can't leave yet? I really want to know, because for some people, the hardest part is the disrespect. For others, it's the mental exhaustion. And for a lot of people, it's the fact that they know the environment is unhealthy, but they still have to show up tomorrow morning and act like everything is normal. So if that's you, stay with me, because the first thing you need to do is not to out-argue a toxic boss. It's not to fix them. It's not to wait for them to suddenly become self-aware. The first thing you need to do is something far more useful. You need to stop seeing this person only as a problem and start using them as fuel. Number 1, turn a toxic boss into fuel for your growth. The first shift you need to make is this. Stop waiting for your toxic boss to become a different person. Stop waiting for the apology. Stop waiting for the self-awareness. Stop waiting for the day they finally realize how much damage they've been causing. Stop waiting for the moment they suddenly become fair, emotionally mature, respectful, calm, and secure. Because in most cases, that moment is not coming. And the longer you keep hoping that this person will transform, the longer you stay emotionally dependent on something you do not control. That hope becomes a trap. It keeps you mentally tied to their moods. It keeps you checking every interaction for signs that maybe things are getting better. It keeps you overanalyzing their tone, their words, their expressions, their reactions, trying to figure out whether this week will be easier than last week. And all of that emotional energy gets spent in the wrong place. Instead of building your next move, you're monitoring their instability. Instead of growing stronger, you're waiting for them to get softer. Instead of preparing for freedom, you're still negotiating with dysfunction. That has to stop. One of the most powerful things you can do in a toxic work environment is to stop treating the situation like a dead end and start treating it like a training ground. Not because the behavior is acceptable, not because you should be grateful for mistreatment, not because toxic leadership is somehow good for you, but because if you are going to be in that environment for a season, then that environment should not be the only thing taking from you. It should also be forced to give you something back. And what it can give you is clarity, urgency, discipline, skill, and a stronger exit strategy. In other words, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How do I use this season to become more prepared than I've ever been?" That question changes everything. Because once you stop trying to emotionally survive one day at a time and start strategically using the pressure, you reclaim power. Every toxic interaction becomes a reminder that your future needs to be built with intention. Every unfair criticism becomes a signal to sharpen your craft. Every dismissive conversation becomes fuel to make sure your next opportunity is one you're actually ready for. This is what I mean when I say, turn a toxic boss into fuel. Use the frustration as momentum. Use the exhaustion as evidence that you need a stronger long-term plan. Use the disappointment as the final push to stop being passive about your own career. A lot of people stay stuck because they experience the pain of a toxic environment, but they never convert that pain into movement. They complain, vent, shut down, and drag themselves through the week, but they don't build anything with the discomfort. They don't update their resume. They don't improve their portfolio. They don't reconnect with old contacts. They don't learn the skill that would make them more marketable. They don't start documenting wins. They don't prepare for interviews. They don't strengthen their leverage. So the environment keeps hurting them, but never produces growth. That is a tragedy. If a toxic boss is going to cost you peace, at the very least, let that season produce preparation. Let it push you to become too skilled, too clear, too ready, and too self-aware to stay stuck forever. And that starts with one brutal truth. You need to accept that their behavior is probably not a phase. It's probably a pattern. This matters because as long as you frame their behavior as temporary, maybe they're just stressed. Maybe it's just this quarter. Maybe once this project is over, they'll calm down. You keep giving yourself false hope. You keep postponing the internal changes you need to make. Now, of course, every person has bad weeks. Every manager can be under pressure. Every workplace has moments of tension. But toxic behavior is different. Toxic behavior has a signature. It repeats. It shows up in patterns. It shows up in how they speak to people when they feel threatened. It shows up in how they blame, control, humiliate, manipulate, ignore, or shift standards depending on their mood. It shows up in the fact that everyone around them has to constantly adapt to their emotional weather. Once you see that clearly, you stop negotiating with the fantasy version of them. And that is liberating. Because when you stop waiting for them to change, you finally start changing your own strategy. You begin asking smarter questions. What skills do I need to build so I'm not trapped here a year from now? What proof of value should I be collecting right now? What accomplishments have I not documented? Who in my network should I reconnect with? What kind of role would actually fit me better than this one? If I had to leave in 3 months, what would I need to have ready? Now, notice what just happened. Your focus moved away from their personality and back to your positioning. That is the shift. A toxic boss wants your attention trapped inside the daily chaos. They want your mental world consumed by their reactions, their opinions, their criticism, their unpredictability. But the moment you begin quietly preparing for your next chapter, you stop being fully trapped in the present version of your job. You create psychological distance. And psychological distance is one of the greatest forms of protection in a toxic environment, because now every bad day means something different. It no longer means I'm stuck and helpless. It means this is another reminder of why I'm building options. It means this is another reason I'm getting sharper. It means this place may be difficult, but it is no longer defining the limits of my future. That's the first layer of turning toxicity into fuel. Use the environment to wake yourself up professionally. But there's a second layer that's just as important. Use your toxic boss as a masterclass in what not to become. This is especially powerful if you lead people now, want to lead people in the future, or simply care about the kind of professional you are becoming. Because one of the hidden opportunities inside bad leadership is that it teaches you in vivid detail what leadership looks like when it is driven by ego, insecurity, fear, poor communication, emotional immaturity, and the need for control. A toxic boss shows you what happens when someone uses pressure instead of trust. They show you what happens when feedback becomes humiliation. They show you what happens when leadership becomes emotional unpredictability. They show you what happens when authority is used to dominate instead of develop. They show you how quickly a team's creativity disappears when people no longer feel safe. They show you how motivation dies when people are constantly bracing for criticism. They show you how trust collapses when standards keep changing. They show you how resentment grows when credit is hoarded and blame is outsourced. If you're paying attention, this is a painful but valuable education. You start building your own leadership code in reverse. You start saying to yourself, when I lead, I will not confuse fear with respect. When I lead, I will not make people earn basic dignity. When I lead, I will not use public embarrassment as a management tool. When I lead, I will not create confusion and call it high standards. When I lead, I will not punish honesty, punish questions, or punish people for bringing me problems. That kind of clarity matters, because pain becomes much more useful when it teaches you who you refuse to become. And sometimes the most important leadership lessons do not come from great mentors. They come from watching terrible examples and deciding with absolute conviction, I will never do that to another person. Now, let's make this practical. If you want to turn a toxic boss into fuel, here are a few things you should start doing immediately. First, build your evidence file. Keep a private record of wins, results, projects, compliments from clients or coworkers, deadlines you met, improvements you made, and problems you solved. Not because you need constant self-validation, but because toxic bosses distort perception. When someone repeatedly minimizes your contribution, it becomes easy to forget your own value. An evidence file keeps your reality intact. Second, update your professional materials before you feel ready. Update your resume. Update your LinkedIn. Organize your portfolio. Write down your measurable achievements while they're fresh. Do not wait until you are desperate, burned out, and trying to escape in panic. Prepare while you still have enough energy to think clearly. Third, use the discomfort to identify skill gaps. Every time you think, I hate feeling stuck here, ask yourself, what would make me less stuck? A stronger portfolio? Better interview skills? More confidence speaking up? A certification? A stronger network? A more visible body of work? Use the frustration to reveal where your leverage is weak. Then start strengthening it. Fourth, reconnect quietly. You do not need to announce anything. You do not need to post dramatic updates. Just begin reaching out to former coworkers, mentors, friends in your industry, or people whose work you respect. Ask how they're doing. Stay connected. Opportunities often come through relationships long before they come through job boards. Fifth, set a private timeline. Even if you cannot leave now, you need to know what you're building toward. Maybe your timeline is 3 months. Maybe it's 6. Maybe it's 1 year because you need to save money, finish a project, or hit a milestone. Fine. But don't let "I can't leave today" turn into "I'll stay in survival mode forever with no plan." Give the season a purpose. That matters more than people realize. Because one of the most damaging feelings in a toxic environment is the feeling of endlessness, the feeling that this is just your life now, indefinitely, with no exit, no control, and no direction. A private timeline breaks that illusion. It reminds you that you are not simply enduring, you are preparing, and that changes how you carry yourself. You become less desperate for their approval because you're no longer building your identity around staying. You become less shocked by their behavior because you've stopped expecting wisdom from someone who repeatedly chooses dysfunction. You become more disciplined with your energy because you know this season is temporary and strategic. You stop wasting so much emotional power trying to reform the person who's hurting the environment. You invest that power back into yourself. That is the heart of this first principle. Don't let a toxic boss be just a source of pain. Force the experience to produce something useful. Let them remind you to sharpen your value. Let them push you to prepare your next move. Let them educate you on the kind of leader you never want to become. Let them expose the areas where you need more leverage, more skill, more options, more confidence, and more self-protection. Because when you do that, the environment still may not be healthy, but it stops being meaningless. And when pain stops being meaningless, it becomes easier to carry without letting it crush you. So before we move on, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a boss who made you think, "I will never treat people like that if I'm ever in charge"? If yes, drop "never like that" in the comments or tell me the one toxic trait you've seen in a boss that you promised yourself you'd never copy. Sometimes the clearest picture of good leadership comes from surviving bad leadership. And once you stop expecting a toxic boss to become your mentor, you can finally use them for what they actually are: a warning, a catalyst, and if you're wise enough, fuel. Number 2, stop making it personal. The second thing you have to do, and this one is hard, is stop making their behavior mean something about you. Not because what they do is okay, not because you should become emotionally numb, not because you should excuse disrespect, manipulation, mood swings, favoritism, public criticism, impossible expectations, or the constant sense that you are walking into an emotional minefield, but because the moment you make a toxic boss's behavior personal, you hand them access to the one place they should never control: your identity. And that is exactly where the damage deepens. A toxic boss can say one careless sentence in a meeting and you carry it for 3 days. They can give vague criticism with no guidance, and suddenly you're questioning your competence. They can ignore your work, dismiss your input, change the rules without warning, or speak to you with a tone they would never use on someone they respect. And if you're not careful, you begin translating all of it into one dangerous conclusion. Something must be wrong with me. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm weak. Maybe I'm not respected because I haven't earned it. Maybe I really am difficult. Maybe I should be able to handle this better. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe if I were smarter, faster, tougher, more polished, more confident, more perfect, they wouldn't treat me like this. That is the trap, because once their behavior becomes your mirror, you start measuring yourself by the emotional instability of someone who may not even know how to measure people fairly in the first place. And if you do that long enough, you start shrinking without realizing it. You become cautious in ways that aren't healthy. You over-explain simple things. You rehearse every email 10 times. You apologize too quickly. You stop offering ideas. You speak less in meetings. You brace for criticism even when no one is criticizing you. You begin editing your personality just to avoid triggering another bad interaction. That's not professionalism. That's adaptation to dysfunction. So if you want to survive a toxic boss without losing yourself, you need to build emotional separation. You need to learn how to say, "This may be directed at me, but it is not necessarily about me." That sentence can save your peace because many toxic bosses are not acting from clarity. They're acting from pressure, insecurity, ego, fear, control, poor emotional regulation, or personal dissatisfaction they have never learned to manage. Some feel threatened by competent people. Some need constant control because chaos inside them makes uncertainty feel intolerable. Some are deeply insecure and use criticism to keep everyone beneath them. Some are under pressure from above and simply dump it downward onto whoever is safest to absorb it. Some don't know how to lead, so they substitute intimidation for structure. Some have tied their identity to authority, so every question sounds like a challenge and every mistake becomes a personal offense. Now, let me be clear. Understanding this does not mean tolerating it. It does not mean defending them. And it does not mean telling yourself, "Oh, they're just stressed, so I guess it's fine." No, it simply means you stop interpreting every toxic behavior as an objective evaluation of your worth. You stop saying, "If they treated me this way, it must be because I deserve it." And instead, you start asking a better question. What is this behavior actually revealing about them? That question creates distance. And distance is everything. One of the most useful ways to think about a toxic boss is to think of them like bad weather. You don't take rain personally. You don't stand in a storm and ask, "Why is the sky attacking me?" You don't yell at the wind and demand that it become emotionally mature. You accept the reality of the weather, and then you prepare accordingly. You bring an umbrella. You change your route. You drive more carefully. You don't deny the storm, but you also don't merge your identity with it. That is the mindset you need here. Your boss may be the emotional weather of your workplace. Unpredictable, cold, stormy, reactive, harsh, intense, difficult to reason with. And while that weather is unpleasant, your job is not to become the weather. Your job is to stop standing in it unprotected. That's a different way of living, because when you stop making it personal, several things begin to change. First, you become more observant and less absorbent. Instead of immediately feeling wounded by every tone shift, every short reply, every passive-aggressive comment, you start studying patterns. You begin noticing. When do they lash out most often? Who do they target and why? What situations trigger their controlling behavior? Are they worse when they feel unprepared, embarrassed, rushed, or challenged? Do they attack ambiguity because they can't tolerate uncertainty? Do they become hostile when they think they're losing status or authority? Why does this matter? Because observation turns chaos into information, and information gives you leverage. When you understand the emotional mechanics of someone's behavior, you can stop walking into the same traps blindly. You can prepare better. You can communicate more strategically. You can protect your energy by anticipating patterns instead of constantly being shocked by them. Again, this is not about becoming manipulative. It's about becoming emotionally intelligent enough to stop being collateral damage. Second, when you stop making it personal, you stop using their reactions as your report card. This is huge. A toxic boss might be disappointed in you one day and praising you the next. They might criticize work they never properly explained. They might move the goalposts and then judge you for not landing where they never clearly pointed. They might give approval inconsistently so that everyone around them is always chasing emotional certainty. If you build your self-worth on that kind of feedback system, you will never feel stable. So you need a better scoreboard. Your scoreboard cannot be their mood. It cannot be their tone. It cannot be whether they smiled at you today. It cannot be whether they gave credit this week. It cannot be whether they were in a good enough mood to acknowledge your effort. Your scoreboard has to become more grounded than that. Did you do quality work? Did you communicate clearly? Did you meet the actual expectation? Did you act with integrity? Did you handle pressure better than you would have 6 months ago? Did you stay calm in a moment that used to throw you off? Did you document what mattered? Did you learn something useful? Did you protect your dignity without becoming reactive? That is a healthier scorecard, because one of the fastest ways to lose yourself under toxic leadership is to let an unstable person become the narrator of your value. Don't do that. They may be your boss, but they do not get final editorial control over who you are. Third, emotional separation helps you respond instead of react. And that matters because toxic bosses often gain power through emotional contagion. They provoke defensiveness. They create confusion. They escalate pressure. They use tone, urgency, criticism, or intimidation to pull you into a reactive state where you stop thinking clearly. Once you're emotional, they have more control. Once you're flustered, you say too much. Once you're defensive, you explain too much. Once you're hurt, you react too quickly. Once you're desperate to be understood, you start arguing with someone who is not actually trying to understand. That's why emotional separation is not passive. It is tactical. It helps you pause internally and say, "This feels personal, but I do not need to process it personally in real time. I do not need to defend my entire character because someone is speaking from frustration. I do not need to absorb their chaos to prove I'm engaged. I can stay calm, gather facts, and decide my response after the emotional wave passes." That internal pause can save you from so many unnecessary battles. Now, let's make this practical. How do you actually stop making it personal when you're in the middle of a difficult work environment? First, stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What pattern am I seeing?" This is one of the most important mental shifts you can make. The first question turns inward and often leads to shame. The second creates observation and distance. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you begin collecting data. For example, every time a deadline moves, they become aggressive. They seem threatened when someone asks clarifying questions in front of other people. They tend to criticize in public when they're under pressure from leadership. They become cold when they feel excluded from information. They give mixed instructions and then blame others for confusion. That kind of pattern recognition changes the emotional temperature inside you. It reminds you that you are dealing with a system, not just a random attack on your worth. Second, name the behavior accurately, not dramatically, not emotionally, accurately. Instead of saying, "My boss hates me," try something more grounded. "My boss becomes controlling when stressed." "My boss gives inconsistent direction." "My boss uses public criticism as a pressure tactic." "My boss avoids accountability and shifts blame." "My boss's communication style is reactive and unclear." Why does this matter? Because accurate language protects you from exaggerated narratives. It helps you stay clear. It helps you respond to reality instead of to panic. "They hate me" makes you feel helpless. "They become controlling under stress" gives you something concrete to prepare for. Third, create a decompression ritual after hard interactions. You cannot always stop your body from reacting in the moment, but you can stop one bad interaction from owning the rest of your day. After a difficult meeting, don't immediately replay it 10 times in your head. Step away if you can. Take a short walk. Write down the facts of what happened. Separate what was said from what you felt about what was said. Breathe. Reset your nervous system before you decide what it meant. Sometimes, the most important thing you can say to yourself after a toxic interaction is, "I need to calm my body before I analyze the meaning." That is emotional maturity. Fourth, borrow perspective from someone outside the system. Toxic environments distort perception. They make abnormal behavior feel normal. They make you doubt yourself. That's why it helps to talk to one grounded person you trust, not 10 people who will only inflame your anger, but one emotionally stable person who can help you reality check what happened. Ask, "Am I seeing this clearly? Would this interaction seem normal to you? Do you think I'm over-explaining myself here? What would you do if you were trying to stay calm but protect yourself?" Sometimes, one outside perspective can stop a week-long spiral. Fifth, remind yourself that someone's role does not automatically make their behavior true. Authority can be loud, titles can be intimidating, but position does not equal emotional accuracy. A boss can have power over your workflow and still be completely wrong about your worth, your motives, your intelligence, or your potential. Do not confuse access with insight. Just because they supervise your work does not mean they understand your value. And the more toxic the person is, the more important that distinction becomes. Now, here's the deeper reason this principle matters. If you don't separate your identity from a toxic boss's behavior, You will carry wounds from one workplace into the next one. You'll leave the job physically but still keep the boss psychologically. You'll get a healthier manager and still brace for attack. You'll enter a good meeting already afraid to speak. You'll apologize before you need to. You'll overwork to prove things no one is asking you to prove. You'll remain trapped in a role that no longer exists because your nervous system learned to live there. That's why this is about more than surviving the current job. This is about protecting the version of you that will exist after this season is over. Do not let a toxic boss become your inner voice. Do not let their instability become your self-image. Do not let their inability to lead become the lens through which you evaluate your own worth. See the behavior clearly. Name it accurately. Study the pattern. Protect your nervous system. And keep reminding yourself, their dysfunction may affect your environment, but it does not get to define your identity. Before we move on, I want to ask you something else. What's harder for you when dealing with a toxic boss, staying calm in the moment or not replaying the interaction afterward? Drop one in the comments. Staying calm or overthinking later? I'm curious which one hits harder for you, because for a lot of people, the meeting ends, but the conversation keeps going in their head for the next 6 hours. And that's exactly why the third principle matters so much. Because once you stop making it personal, the next step is learning how to stop feeding the cycle. Number 3, neutralize them with consistency and professionalism. The third thing you need to do is learn how to stop feeding the cycle. Because toxic bosses do not just create stress through what they say. They often create power through what they pull out of other people. They provoke confusion. They trigger defensiveness. They create urgency without clarity. They criticize in a way that makes you scramble to explain yourself. They shift blame and wait for you to panic. They use tone, unpredictability, or pressure to throw you off balance. And once you're off balance, they gain leverage. Why? Because a reactive employee is easier to control than a steady one. A flustered employee explains too much. A defensive employee reveals too much. An emotional employee makes mistakes. A panicked employee loses precision. A desperate employee starts chasing approval instead of protecting clarity. That is why one of the most powerful ways to deal with a toxic boss is to become incredibly difficult to destabilize. Not cold, not passive-aggressive, not robotic, not fake, steady, consistent, clear, prepared, professional, hard to bait, hard to confuse, hard to pull into unnecessary emotional chaos. This matters because toxic people often rely on emotional momentum. They say something sharp, and the other person reacts. They create pressure, and the other person rushes. They imply blame, and the other person starts over-explaining. They criticize vaguely, and the other person gets emotionally tangled trying to prove innocence instead of calmly clarifying fact. But when you stop giving them those reactions, something changes. You interrupt the loop. You stop being emotional fuel for their management style. You stop giving them easy openings to escalate. You stop handing over your composure every time they enter the room with tension in their voice. And perhaps most importantly, the people around you start noticing the difference. Because in a toxic environment, there are always witnesses. Co-workers are watching. Peers are watching. Other leaders are watching. Sometimes HR is quietly watching. Sometimes future opportunities are watching. People notice who escalates and who stays grounded. They notice who becomes chaotic under pressure and who keeps clarity. They notice who reacts impulsively and who communicates with discipline. Your professionalism is not just about surviving the boss. It's about protecting your reputation in an environment where reputations can easily get distorted. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like. It starts with controlling the first 10 seconds of your response. When a toxic boss throws criticism at you, questions your work aggressively, or speaks in a way designed to make you flinch, the first battle is internal. Your body wants to defend, your mind wants to explain, your emotions want to react. But those first few seconds matter more than most people realize. Because if you can buy yourself even 3 to 5 seconds of internal space, you dramatically increase your chance of responding well. That pause might look invisible from the outside, but internally it sounds like this. Slow down. Do not match the energy. Do not answer the tone, answer the issue. Clarify before defending. Stay with facts, one sentence at a time. That tiny moment of self-command can keep an entire conversation from spiraling, because a toxic boss often expects immediate emotional movement. They expect your face to change. They expect your tone to tighten. They expect you to start scrambling. They expect confusion, fear, or defensiveness. When instead they get calm structure, the dynamic changes. Not always dramatically, not always instantly, but meaningfully. Now let's go deeper. One of the best tools you can use in a toxic environment is what I call professional neutral language. This is language that acknowledges the situation without surrendering your clarity. Language that doesn't inflame the moment. Language that doesn't invite unnecessary argument. Language that keeps the focus on facts, actions, expectations, and next steps. For example, instead of reacting emotionally when they say, "Why is this not done? I already told you what I wanted," you might say, "I understand the concern. Let me make sure I'm aligned on the exact expectation so I can address it correctly." That sentence does several things at once. It does not argue. It does not apologize for things you haven't confirmed. It does not accept distorted blame automatically. And it redirects the conversation toward clarity. Or if they say something vague and critical like, "This isn't what I asked for," instead of defending your entire effort, you can say, "Thanks for flagging that. Can you point me to the specific part that needs to change so I can correct it efficiently?" Again, calm, specific, focused. Or if they're escalating in a meeting and trying to corner you in real time, "I want to make sure I respond accurately, so let me confirm the details before I answer that." That buys you time. It protects you from impulsive answers. It signals discipline. Or if they're changing direction after the fact, "I'm happy to adjust. To make sure I execute the updated direction correctly, can we confirm the revised priority and timeline?" That is a powerful sentence because it does not accuse them of changing the rules, even if they are, but it creates a record of the change and forces clarity around the new expectation. Or if you're being blamed for confusion that wasn't clearly communicated, "I want to make sure I'm following the right process going forward. Can we clarify what the expectation should be in situations like this?" Notice the pattern in all of these responses. You are not surrendering. You are not groveling. You are not pretending their tone is healthy. You are not becoming weak. You are staying in control of your side of the interaction. That is strength. Real professionalism is not being endlessly agreeable. It is being composed enough to stay effective under pressure without losing your dignity. Now, I want to be careful here. Being calm does not mean you never push back. It does not mean you never document. It does not mean you never escalate legitimate issues through the proper channels if necessary. What it means is that when you do respond, you do it from stability instead of from emotional hijack. That difference matters because once you're reactive, your message gets easier to dismiss. But when you are clear, factual, and consistent, you become much harder to discredit. Consistency is your shield. A toxic boss may be erratic. Your protection is that you are not. You become known for being prepared. You follow up in writing when needed. You confirm priorities. You summarize decisions. You document deadlines. You ask clarifying questions early. You keep receipts when expectations shift. You stay respectful, but you do not stay vague. This is where professionalism becomes strategic, not performative. For example, after a confusing meeting, instead of sitting in uncertainty, you send a short follow-up message. "Thanks for the discussion earlier. To confirm my understanding, the priority is X, the deadline is Y, and the revised expectation is Z. Please let me know if I've misunderstood anything." That message does two important things. First, it protects you from future confusion. Second, it creates documentation without sounding combative. In a healthy workplace, that kind of message simply improves communication. In a toxic workplace, it can protect you from revisionist history. And if you work under someone who regularly denies what they said, changes standards after the fact, or blames others for unclear direction, documentation is not paranoia. It is professionalism. Another key part of neutralizing the cycle is refusing to perform panic. This is huge. Toxic bosses often create the feeling that everything is urgent. Everything is your fault. Everything must be solved immediately. and every mistake is a crisis. If you absorb that emotional framing every time, your nervous system never gets a break. So one of the most useful habits you can build is asking yourself, is this actually an emergency or is this someone else's anxiety being handed to me? That question can change how you carry a whole day. Sometimes something really is urgent. Fine, handle it. But often the urgency is inflated by tone, not by fact. The boss is stressed, so the room becomes stressed. The boss is disorganized, so everyone else is expected to sprint. The boss failed to plan, so now your calm is being asked to compensate for their chaos. You do not need to mirror that energy to be responsible. You can move quickly without moving frantically. You can take ownership without taking emotional blame for everything in sight. You can care deeply without acting like every tense message is a 5-alarm fire. That is emotional discipline. And then there's one more part that people often overlook. Prepare before the pressure hits. Most people only think about composure after the conversation starts. That's too late. If you already know you're walking into a difficult one-on-one, a tense status meeting, a performance conversation, or any interaction where your boss tends to become reactive, controlling, or dismissive, do not walk in mentally cold. Take 5 minutes beforehand and prepare. Ask yourself, what is the most likely criticism I'll hear? What facts do I need in front of me? What point do I need to communicate clearly? Where might they try to create confusion? What question can I ask if they become vague? What sentence can I use if they interrupt or escalate? What outcome do I want from this conversation besides surviving it? This is not overthinking. This is rehearsal for stability. Even visualizing the worst version of the conversation can help. Why? Because when you've already imagined the interruption, the accusation, the dismissive tone, the blame shift, it hits you with less force when it happens. You're not shocked by the behavior. You've already decided how you want to respond. That gives you options. For example, if you know your boss tends to attack broadly, you're dropping the ball on everything lately, you can prepare a grounded response like, I want to address that seriously. Can we walk through the specific examples you're referring to so I can understand exactly what needs to improve? If you know they tend to interrupt and steamroll, you can prepare something like, I want to be respectful of time, so let me answer directly in one sentence. If you know they tend to rewrite history, you can prepare to calmly say, I may be remembering it differently, so I'd like to check the notes from that conversation to make sure I'm aligned. That is what preparation does. It turns reaction into response. Now, I want to say something important here. Consistency and professionalism will not magically transform a toxic boss into a healthy one. Let's not romanticize this. Some people are committed to dysfunction. Some people do not respond to calm with respect. Some people will continue to be difficult, no matter how clear, measured, or some environments are so unhealthy that documentation, composure, and strategic communication are not enough, and eventually, the right move really is to leave. So if you are listening to this and thinking, I've already tried being calm and professional, and my boss is still awful, that does not mean you failed. It may simply mean you are dealing with someone whose behavior is deeply rooted and outside your power to fix. The purpose of this third principle is not to control them. It is to protect you, to protect your reputation, to protect your peace, to protect your clarity, to protect your decision-making, to protect your ability to stay steady while you decide what comes next. That is the win, because when you stop feeding the cycle, you stop giving the environment so much access to your nervous system. You become more intentional with your words, more disciplined with your reactions, more strategic with documentation, more prepared for difficult conversations, more capable of staying clear under pressure. And that matters far beyond this boss. These are career skills, leadership skills, emotional regulation skills, boundary skills, communication skills, self-respect skills. So yes, a toxic boss may be trying to create chaos around you, but they do not have to create chaos inside you. Before I close this out, I want to ask you one final question. What's one professional sentence or boundary you wish you had learned earlier when dealing with a toxic boss? Drop it in the comments. It might genuinely help someone else who's going through it right now. Because sometimes the best thing about these conversations is not just the advice in the video, it's the shared experience underneath it. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. A toxic boss can control the atmosphere of a room. They can affect your workload. They can create stress. They can test your patience. They can make a season of your life far harder than it should be. But they do not get automatic ownership of your identity, your future, or the way you choose to carry yourself through the storm. That part still belongs to you. And when quitting is not an immediate option, that truth becomes incredibly important, because at that point, the question is no longer just, how do I survive this boss? The deeper question becomes, how do I go through this season without letting it turn me into someone I don't respect? That is the real battle, not just keeping the paycheck, not just getting through the meetings, not just avoiding conflict, but protecting your mind, your standards, your confidence, and your future while you're still inside an environment that keeps trying to pull you out of yourself. And that's why these 3 principles matter so much. Number 1. Turn a toxic boss into fuel for your growth. Stop waiting for them to change and start using the discomfort to sharpen your skills, strengthen your leverage, prepare your exit strategy, and build a future that does not depend on their approval. Number 2, stop making it personal. Their dysfunction may be aimed at you, but it is not always about you. Learn to separate your worth from their behavior. Observe the pattern. Protect your identity. Don't let someone else's instability become your inner voice. Number 3, neutralize the cycle with consistency and professionalism. Stay calm. Stay clear. Document what matters. Prepare before difficult interactions. Use steady language. Don't perform panic. Don't hand over your composure every time they bring chaos into the room. And if you do those 3 things, something powerful begins to happen. You stop feeling as helpless. You stop feeling as emotionally exposed. You stop waiting for the environment to become healthy before you're allowed to become strong. You start taking your power back in small, quiet, intelligent ways. And sometimes that is how real change begins. Not with one dramatic resignation, not with one perfect confrontation, but with a series of deliberate decisions that say, I will not let this environment define me. I will not let this season waste me. I will not let someone else's broken leadership teach me to abandon myself. Maybe you do leave eventually. Maybe you build your strategy and move on. Maybe you find a better team, a healthier culture, a leader who actually knows how to lead. I hope you do. But even before that day comes, you can still win something important right now. Clarity, self-respect, emotional control, preparation, and the ability to walk through a hard season without losing the best parts of yourself. So if this video helped you, or if you know someone who is trying to survive a toxic boss without being able to quit yet, leave a comment below and share your experience. I read them, and I know other people reading them will feel less alone too. And if you're in that season right now, let me leave you with this. Just because you're stuck in a difficult environment today does not mean you are trapped there forever. Just because someone has authority over your role does not mean they have authority over your worth. And just because this season is painful does not mean it can't still prepare you for something better. Stay steady, stay sharp, protect your peace, build your next move quietly, and do not let a toxic boss convince you to forget who you are.